It was a cold winter morning in Sacramento, California. The sun barely touched the rooftops, and silence hung heavily over the quiet suburban street. But something about that house, with its cracked brown door and sagging porch, felt wrong. When the officers finally forced their way inside, what they saw would haunt them forever. A woman's lifeless body lay sprawled on the living room floor. Her face was mutilated, her abdomen grotesquely torn open. Blood covered everything: the carpet, the walls, even the ceiling. But most disturbingly, something was missing from her body. That day marked the beginning of a nightmare that would grip Sacramento in terror. A string of brutal murders followed, random, savage, and horrifying. They weren't committed for money or revenge, they were committed for blood, and behind them stood not a myth, not a monster from folklore, but a pale, gaunt young man with vacant eyes and a fragile frame. His name was Richard Chase, but to the public, he became known as the Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Trenton Chase was born on May 23, 1950, in Santa Clara, California. On the surface, his early life looked ordinary: a father with a steady job, a mother who stayed at home, and a small house in a modest neighborhood. But what happened behind closed doors was far from normal. His father was controlling and physically abusive, often disciplining Richard with aggression. His mother was emotionally unstable, obsessive about cleanliness, and quick to paranoia. The home was cold, not in temperature, but in affection. Richard was often isolated, left to navigate the world on his own terms. From an early age, Richard exhibited alarming behaviors. He frequently wet the bed well into childhood, tortured small animals for amusement, and kept to himself, avoiding other children. These warning signs, known in psychology as the McDonald Triad or the homicidal triad, are chilling predictors of violent tendencies in adulthood. As he grew older, things only worsened. Richard began lying compulsively, stealing from family members, and using drugs and alcohol by his early teens. But what disturbed his mother the most wasn't the substance use or the rebellion, it was something else. Richard would complain of strange sensations in his head. He told her that something was moving inside his skull, that his blood was turning to dust, and that his heart sometimes stopped beating. She didn't know it then, but these were early signs of paranoid schizophrenia. By the time Richard entered high school, his grip on reality had begun to slip. He appeared detached, emotionally flat, and socially awkward. While most teenagers were forming friendships or chasing dreams, Richard became increasingly withdrawn, paranoid, and fixated on his own body. He believed that something, was trying to poison him. He would hold oranges against his head, claiming that the vitamin C would be absorbed through his skull and cure him. He thought his stomach was rotting from the inside, that his heart would stop at random intervals, and that his blood was vanishing. These weren't just odd thoughts, they were symptoms of a growing psychotic break. Despite his unraveling mental state, Richard managed to graduate high school. He even enrolled in American River College for a time. But his focus was never on academics. Instead, he spiraled deeper into drugs, especially LSD and alcohol, both of which only intensified his delusions. His appearance changed drastically. He became painfully thin, unkempt, and erratic. He stopped caring about hygiene. Friends, what few he had, began to keep their distance. Eventually, his family could no longer ignore his deterioration. He was taken to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and recommended institutionalization. But Richard didn't want help. He believed he didn't need it, that the world was sick, not him. In 1973, after a violent argument with his mother, Richard moved out on his own. He rented a small apartment in Sacramento, and it was there, in isolation, that his darkest fantasies took root. Neighbors reported strange smells coming from his unit. Others saw him carrying dead animals into the apartment. By 1975, Richard Chase had crossed a line that many disturbed minds only fantasize about. He had begun harming living creatures, not for defense or survival, but as ritual. Inside his filthy Sacramento apartment, he kept a collection of dead animals: rabbits, cats, birds, even dogs. He would dismember them, blend their internal organs with Coca-Cola in a blender, and drink the mixture. He believed this gruesome concoction would replenish his deteriorating body, protect him from diseases, and stop his heart from shrinking. But the animals were no longer enough. His behavior became increasingly bizarre and threatening. He was arrested in the Nevada desert in 1976. Officers found him naked and covered in blood. When questioned, Richard claimed that the blood was his, though further investigation revealed it belonged to a cow he had mutilated. He was detained and evaluated, eventually leading to his involuntary commitment to a mental institution, the Beverly Manor facility. It was there that doctors and nurses witnessed the full scale of his psychosis. He would talk about Nazi UFOs controlling him through invisible signals. He would insist that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery. He smeared blood on his face. He hoarded raw meat. He asked for animal organs to be delivered to his room. Staff began to nickname him Dracula, but the system failed. Despite clear signs of severe mental illness and dangerous behavior, Richard was declared no longer a threat and was released in 1976, just 1 year before his killing spree would begin. He was placed under the care of his mother, who, in a decision that remains heavily criticized, took him off his medication. She believed he didn't need pills, that they dulled him, made him someone else. She was right. Without them, he would become something far worse. On December 29, 1977, the city of Sacramento took its first step into a nightmare. Richard Chase, now 27 years old, had been spiraling in silence, his delusions growing darker, his thirst for blood evolving into something insatiable. He no longer wanted to drink animal blood. He believed only human blood could save him now. That day, 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin, a mild-mannered engineer and father of two, was helping his wife unload groceries outside their home. He was unaware that Richard Chase was driving slowly down the street in a stolen car, holding a .22 caliber pistol in his lap. Without warning or provocation, Chase fired 2 shots from the moving vehicle. One of them struck Ambrose in the chest, killing him instantly in front of his wife. It was a random, senseless killing, and for the police, a mystery. There were no witnesses, no obvious motive, and no connection between the victim and the killer. The only clue was a pair of shell casings found near the body. Chase, on the other hand, felt nothing. To him, the shooting was a test, a step forward. The bloodshed didn't satisfy him. It wasn't personal enough. He needed to be closer, much closer. Over the following days, he began prowling neighborhoods during the day, testing the doors of homes at random. If the door was locked, he moved on. If it was unlocked, he saw it as a sign that he was invited in, a chilling interpretation echoing vampire folklore. Meanwhile, police had no leads. The Griffin murder had shaken the community, but it was only the beginning. Chase's sickness was accelerating, and he was preparing for something far more intimate and far more monstrous. Just 3 weeks after the murder of Ambrose Griffin, Richard Chase escalated, violently, horrifically, and without warning. It was January 23, 1978, when he came upon the home of Teresa Wallin, a 22-year-old woman who was 3 months pregnant. Her husband was at work. She was alone. Her front door was unlocked. To Chase, that was permission. He entered without hesitation, carrying the .22 caliber pistol he used to kill Ambrose Griffin. Inside, he encountered Teresa and shot her 3 times, once in the hand as she raised it in defense, and twice in the head. She collapsed instantly, but the horror had only just begun. Chase dragged her body into the bedroom. He retrieved a butcher knife from the kitchen and proceeded to mutilate her corpse. He cut open her abdomen, removed several of her organs, and smeared blood across the walls and furniture. He then defecated in her hallway and used a yogurt cup to collect her blood, which he drank on the spot. When her husband David returned home later that day, he found a crime scene straight out of a nightmare. His wife's body desecrated, their home reeking of blood, rot, and madness. Police were stunned. The brutality of the murder defied reason. It wasn't just violent, It was ritualistic, delusional, and inhuman. The method of killing, the post-mortem mutilation, the evidence of blood consumption, all of it pointed toward a killer disconnected from reality. But they had no idea who he was, no fingerprints, no motive, no witnesses. Just one certainty: he would strike again. And he did. 4 days after the brutal slaying of Teresa Wallin, Richard Chase committed one of the most horrific mass murders in California history. The date was January 27, 1978. His mind was beyond broken. He believed his blood was still deteriorating, that his body was disintegrating from the inside. He needed more blood, more organs, more life. He set his sights on a house on Merritt Way, the home of Evelyn Miroth, a 36-year-old mother. She lived there with her 6-year-old son Jason, her 22-month-old nephew David Ferreira, whom she was babysitting, and her friend Dan Meredith, who had stopped by that morning. When Chase approached the house, Dan Meredith was the first to die. He was in the driveway when Chase shot him at point-blank range, stole his car keys, and entered the home through the front door. Inside, what followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. Jason, the 6-year-old, was shot in the head. Evelyn attempted to hide in the bathroom, but Chase found her, shot her, dragged her body to the bed, and brutally mutilated her, similar to his previous victim. He drank her blood, removed several internal organs, and performed acts of necrophilia. The infant, David Ferreira, was taken from his playpen, murdered, and his body was taken from the scene. When a visitor arrived and found the door slightly ajar, he stepped inside and immediately ran out, calling the police. The scene that greeted investigators was beyond human comprehension. Blood was splattered across every room, the bodies were mutilated and discarded like garbage, and one child, the baby, was missing. This time, the police knew. This wasn't just a killer. This was something else. The media exploded. Headlines called him a monster. Parents locked their doors. Neighborhoods fell into panic. Police now realized that the killings of Ambrose Griffin, Teresa Wallin, and this massacre were all connected. They had a serial killer on their hands, one who was acting fast with no cooling-off period and no boundaries. The slaughter at Evelyn Miroth's house sent a wave of panic through Sacramento. But amid the terror, investigators now had a vital opportunity, a fresh crime scene filled with potential evidence. Detectives carefully scoured the house. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, floors, ceilings. But amid the chaos, they found something useful. Bloody footprints. Handprints on the doorknob, a .22 caliber shell casing matching the same weapon used in the Griffin and Wallin murders, and most importantly, a witness. A neighbor recalled seeing a disheveled man with stringy hair, wearing an orange parka, leaving the home shortly before the police arrived. She remembered his sunken cheeks, wild eyes, and the strange way he moved, like a man who wasn't entirely there. When police released a composite sketch based on her description, another tip came in, this time from Nancy Holden, a woman who had gone to high school with Richard Chase. Just days before the Wallin murder, Nancy had encountered him in a store. She described him as filthy, reeking of body odor, with wide, staring eyes and strange ramblings about being mistreated by the government. He had cornered her, called her by name. Even though they hadn't spoken in years, she had gotten away. But she never forgot his face. When she saw the composite sketch in the paper, she immediately called police and gave them his name: Richard Trenton Chase. With a name to pursue, investigators began building a profile. They checked his criminal history, discovered his history of psychiatric hospitalization, and realized he had purchased several firearms, including a .22 caliber pistol. They staked out his apartment. What they found outside was chilling. Dan Meredith's stolen car, parked just down the street. It was enough for a warrant, and what they found inside the apartment would confirm everything. On January 28, 1978, police officers, armed with a search warrant, approached Richard Chase's small apartment on Watt Avenue. They knocked. No response. Then, they heard movement. Chase tried to slip out the back, but officers were ready. He was tackled, handcuffed, and immediately taken into custody. His appearance was shocking even to seasoned officers. He was emaciated, barely more than skin and bone. His face and hands were stained with blood. He was wearing a blood-soaked parka, the same one seen by the witness. But the real horror was waiting inside. As detectives stepped into the apartment, a wave of nauseating stench hit them. It was a small, filthy space, but every inch of it spoke of madness and violence. On the floor, walls, and ceiling, smeared blood. In the kitchen sink, bloody blenders, crusted with tissue and human remains. In the fridge, body parts, a blender filled with blood and internal organs, dishes with raw brains and bits of tissue, animal carcasses in various stages of decay. One disturbing find stopped everyone cold. David Ferreira's brain, the missing infant, was found buried in a container. This wasn't just a killer. It was a ritualistic cannibal, a man completely unmoored from reality. Investigators collected over 100 pieces of physical evidence from the apartment. DNA matched the blood to all the victims. The .22 caliber pistol was recovered, clothing, knives, scalpels. All of it pointed to one man, Richard Chase. The apartment was dubbed the Vampire's Lair by the press, but despite the overwhelming evidence, Chase was calm in custody. He made no effort to escape, to hide, or to deny. In his mind, he had to do what he did. He believed the Nazis were poisoning his blood, that he needed to drink blood to survive, that the government was watching him through his refrigerator. He wasn't hiding. He was surviving. In his own twisted, delusional logic, he was the victim. Richard Chase was formally charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder. The trial, which began in early 1979, quickly became one of the most disturbing and controversial in California's legal history. The evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics matched the .22 caliber pistol to the shell casings found at multiple crime scenes. Bloodstains, fingerprints, and footprints linked him to every murder. Witnesses placed him at the scenes or near them. His apartment was a horrific shrine of forensic evidence, including human remains, cannibalized body parts, and blood samples. The infant David Ferreira's remains sealed his identity beyond doubt. But the defense didn't argue innocence. They argued insanity. Richard's attorneys painted a picture of a deeply psychotic man, suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, detached from reality, and driven by uncontrollable delusions. They claimed he was incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, therefore not criminally responsible. And the evidence supported their claims. He believed his stomach was rotting. He thought his heart stopped beating at times. He believed Nazi UFOs were controlling him through secret signals. He drank animal and human blood to replenish himself and stop his blood from turning to powder. Psychiatrists testified that Chase had a long history of untreated, severe mental illness and had exhibited clear signs of psychosis years before the murders. He had been institutionalized, diagnosed, and released, against warnings. The prosecution, however, pushed back hard. They argued that Richard Chase, while mentally ill, was fully aware of his actions. He planned his attacks, he brought weapons, he covered his tracks, he fled scenes. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He just didn't care. The trial lasted 5 months. In May 1979, after hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on all 6 counts of first-degree murder, and the sentence, death by gas chamber. Richard Chase showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he would await his execution. But death would come in a different form. Richard Chase was now known across America as the Vampire of Sacramento. His crimes had horrified a nation, and his name had become synonymous with pure, mindless evil. But behind the prison walls of San Quentin, he was no longer feared. He was mocked. Inmates, many of whom were murderers themselves, refused to eat near him. Some were disgusted by the details of his crimes. Others believed he was so far gone mentally that he belonged in a hospital, not death row. Chase's behavior in prison was strange, though not violent. He spent his days pacing, mumbling to himself, and refusing to eat food he thought was poisoned. He would save up fruit or meat from his meals, and hide them under his mattress or inside his toilet, believing they would recharge his blood later. Prison psychiatrists continued to evaluate him and confirmed what many already knew. Richard Chase was not faking. He was profoundly ill, a man lost entirely in delusion. But Chase had his own plan. On December 26, 1980, just 18 months after being sentenced to death, a guard found Richard Chase lying motionless in his cell. In his hand was a bottle of prison-issued antidepressants. He had hoarded weeks' worth of pills and taken them all at once. At the age of 30, Richard Trenton Chase was dead, by suicide. There would be no execution, no final words, no remorse, just silence. Epilogue: a monster born, not made. In the aftermath of Chase's death, debates raged. Was he a product of a broken system? A mentally ill man who should have been hospitalized, not sentenced to die? Or was he a true predator who used madness as a shield for the horrors he committed? Experts dissected his case for years. True crime books were written, documentaries aired, and yet there remains no clear answer. But one truth is certain. Richard Chase left behind a legacy not of mystery, but of madness. A legacy soaked in blood, sorrow, and the chilling reminder that not all monsters hide in the dark. Some walk beside us in the daylight, and some knock on doors that are left unlocked.